Exposed. The incredible journey of a janitor who hiddenly solved a $1 billion equation. Frank Hudson had always been invisible, a ghost in the pristine halls of a renowned university in a small Midwest town. At 45, he was a weary man, shadows under his tired eyes deepening with each passing day. He shuffled through the campus, mop and bucket his companions, while whispers of brilliance and innovation echoed through the lecture halls he cleaned. Above him, dreams floated like dust motes, reminders of the life he could have led. Emily needed braces, and Maria worked double shifts just to scrape by. The weight of financial struggle pressed against him, suffocating, reminding him that he was just a janitor, a title that sliced through him like a knife. But tonight was different. As he scrubbed the floor of a cluttered classroom, he noticed the chalkboard, a jumble of equations left over from some brilliant mind. Among them, one equation stood out, its complexity taunting him. Something stirred inside, a flicker of hope igniting an old flame he'd long since buried. Math had always been his escape, but years of weariness had dulled its light. Frank hesitated, glancing around to ensure he was alone. Could he dare? Could he leap back into the swirling world of numbers he had once loved? The shadows of his responsibilities loomed large behind him, but he slowly allowed the whispers of the equation to creep into his mind, pulling him in deeper. The days turned into weeks, each night spent grappling with the untamed complexity of the equation while scrubbing floors by day. His exhaustion began to twist into exhilaration, and he felt something awaken within, a sense of worth that had long been silenced. But lurking beneath that determination was fear. What if he failed? What if the faculty and students of this prestigious university only saw the janitor, not the brilliance hidden within? Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system, and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. As Frank's fingertips traced the sides of the solution he had painstakingly deciphered, he felt the surge of exhilaration only rivaled by the weight of lurking dread. His heart raced at the thought of submitting his findings for the prestigious grant offered by the university. A real chance to step into the light, to be recognized not just as a janitor, but as a mathematician. But doubt crept in. Could he possibly gather the courage to risk exposure? To let others see the fleeting brilliance he kept carefully locked away? He stood at a crossroads, each path weighing heavy with ramifications. Could his secret ever escape beneath the layers of preconceptions that clung to him like a second skin? The clock ticked down to the grant submission deadline, and with it came the suffocating despair of unworthiness. He longed to be the hero for Emily, to show her that hard work and intellect could elevate them out of their struggles. And yet, as Frank prepared to submit, he was acutely aware that the world beyond his battered mop and bucket was one that valued pedigree over perseverance. Would he be seen as the janitor who got lucky, or the mathematician deserving of recognition? As the first hints of dawn illuminated the classroom, he clenched his fists, muscles taut with fear and anticipation. Standing at the precipice, he wondered if he could rise against the tide of scorn that threatened to drown him. Would he finally become something more than just the janitor? The moment weighed on him. The air felt dense, thick with unfulfilled dreams. Frank stood before his computer, the screen flickering in the pale morning light. A solitary cursor blinked mockingly, urging him to take the leap. What if this was all an exercise in futility? What if the truth was that he was simply a janitor, unworthy of the world of academia he so envied? In that critical moment, a rush of memories flooded his mind. The nights spent poring over textbooks borrowed from the library, the thrill of solving perplexing problems, the confounding joy when understanding dawned like the rise of the sun. Would he allow that flame to extinguish once more? Emily's bright smile flashed before him, her braces a constant reminder of their struggles. That smile embodied the reason he had to persevere. Taking a deep breath, Frank gripped the mouse, poised over the submit button. His mind raced. What would the faculty think? Would they laugh? Perhaps dismiss the submission as an amusing anomaly? A surge of resolve washed over him then, overpowering the shackles of doubt. In that moment, Frank decided, He would let nothing silence his voice this time. He clicked. The acknowledgement popped up the screen like a burst of confetti. Application submitted. A wave of liberation mixed with terror surged through him. Frank felt the air shift around him. For the first time he had pushed past the invisible barriers that had defined his existence. But mere submission was only the beginning. He had transformed from passive observer to active participant. As the days slid by, Frank threw himself into his work and the complexities of math as never before. The janitor-esque cart became his sanctuary, equipped with books, notes, and the occasional energy drink. The hum of campus life buzzed around him, a constant reminder of the brilliance that flourished within those walls. Yet, he felt a growing dissonance, his two worlds fraying at the edges. Among colleagues who eyed him as just another cleanup man, his confidence began to waver. The relentless self-doubt returned, echoing louder than before. He overheard students discussing algorithms and proofs, radiant enthusiasm lacing their voices. Would they ever allow someone like him to share in their conversations? In those moments, the weight of their expectations fell onto him like lead. Did he really belong here? The prestige of the grant loomed like a mountain, imposing, intimidating, and yet tantalizingly close. Fueled by a mix of desperation and determination, Frank began to formulate a new plan. He needed allies, mentors, a network that saw beyond his uniform. Late-night study sessions with the students weren't enough. He needed to challenge himself further, push against the limits of his own potential. His path became clearer as he explored ways to develop his skills, seeking out volunteer opportunities, anything that would put him in close contact with faculty and bright minds. It didn't take long before he found an open mathematics seminar. The thought made his stomach twist, but he resolved to attend, perhaps even speak up. That evening, as he prepared for his first seminar, Frank dressed in his best clothes, an old pair of khakis and a faded polo, the best he had. The act felt monumental, a bridge crossing into the unknown. He rehearsed earnest questions and contributions in front of the mirror, clutching a notepad filled with scribbles of equations and an insatiable curiosity. What if they welcomed him? What if he found a sense of belonging? As he closed the door behind him and stepped into the world of students and professors, adrenaline coursed through his veins. The stakes had never been higher. It was time for Frank Hudson to confront the biases of perception, to claim a space at the table he had long thought was reserved for others. He was no longer just a ghost, but a specter of possibility, ready to begin a dialogue. And there, amidst the chattering academia, he caught sight of a familiar face, the faculty member whose lecture had lingered in his mind all those years, a brilliant mathematician whose own journey had begun in humble circumstances. The time had come to face the fear that had haunted him for too long. It was now or never. Would he find courage in those familiar eyes, or would he once again vanish into the background? Frank's strides echoed in the lecture hall as he stepped further into the realm of academia. His heart pounded like a drum, marking a defining moment. The familiar face of Professor Lawson cut through the crowd, an individual who had turned obstacles into stepping stones. Would the professor recognize him, see the potential buried beneath the janitorial uniform? As he settled into a creaky wooden chair, the sensation of being an imposter clung to him. Around him, students exchanged ideas with exuberance. Their animated discussions of theory and application felt distant and foreign. He fidgeted with his notepad, the familiar equations seeming less like promises of understanding and more like encrypted messages, taunting him. The seminar began, and Frank watched as the professor illuminated ideas with ease, weaving intricate narratives around complex concepts. Frank found himself scribbling notes, but the thrill of understanding felt muffled beneath the weight of expectation he imposed on himself. He marveled at the students who participated effortlessly, their voices strong and clear. Would they even notice if he dared to speak? Each time Professor Lawson posed a question, Frank's internal monologue flipped through his mental library of angles and proofs. He would phrase a response in his mind but faltered at the last moment, a bird frozen at the edge of flight. Would these peers accept input from someone who scrubbed their classrooms clean? Halfway through, the moment arrived, now or never. The professor asked about a recent mathematical anomaly, a challenge that had confounded some of the brightest minds. Frank felt the heat of opportunity rising from within. The need to speak surged, a primal call. He raised his hand, uncertainty spiraling through him like a roller coaster. Professor Lawson's gaze landed on him. "Yes, you there," he said, smile warm and inviting. Frank stood up, compelled by a mixture of determination and dread. "I think I might have a thought about that. If you consider, the but words faltered, twisting in his throat. Silence enveloped him, a thick veil that felt impossible to pierce. He saw the student's eyes, curious and probing, misjudging the slack on their lips as derision. He could feel the sweat forming at his brow. Professor Lawson jumped in, guiding him gently. "Frank, take your time. Remember, we're here to explore ideas together." At that moment, Frank felt a pressure release, a spark igniting within. With Professor Lawson's support, the notion that he was merely a janitor dissipated. He gathered his thoughts, breathing through the tightness in his chest. "My idea revolves around reframing the primary equations. If we factor in the additional variables shown in the last theorem, we might uncover." As he spoke, hesitations faded and confidence took the helm. He felt walls around him dissolve, a new reality forming where he wasn't just an outlier. The seminar morphed into a collaboration, the names of equations and theories becoming a joint exploration rather than an adversarial exchange. By the end of his contribution, applause erupted around him. The warmth of approval washed over him. Professor Lawson's approving nod grounded him in an unfamiliar certainty. "Fantastic insight, Frank. Your perspective adds a vital layer to our discussion. Let us continue to investigate this further." Those words lit a fire deep in his core. For once, he had not just stood at the fringes but had forged a path into the discourse he had longed to claim as his own. As he left the lecture hall, step lightened by validation, a realization settled. He was capable of more than he ever believed. He could bridge the worlds he inhabited. But as he turned to leave, a shadow flickered, a student he had never noticed before, glancing at him with a look of contempt that abruptly froze his newfound momentum. There it was again, the question of belonging etched in that look. The struggle had not ended. It had merely begun. Would he handle the scrutiny of those who still saw only the janitor? The answer hovered tantalizingly close, dangling like an unfinished equation waiting to be solved. The stakes had just risen again. He had to confront not only the perceptions of others but far more critically, his own. How would he navigate this new chapter? The clamor of the students in the hallway flooded Frank's ears as he stepped outside the lecture hall. His head swirled with the dichotomy of validation and unshakable doubt. Applause still reverberated within him, but that one harsh stare haunted his thoughts. What if it wasn't just a fleeting glimpse? What if it was an unshakable reminder of his past, a reminder he couldn't escape? Determined to embrace this surge of newfound confidence, Frank decided to confront that doubt directly. He took a deep breath and plunged into the sea of students chatting in animated clusters. Instead of drifting past them like a ghost, he took the opportunity to engage. He spotted a group discussing collaborative projects for their upcoming coursework. "Excuse me," he interrupted, his voice steadier than he expected. "Can I offer a suggestion?" The students turned, their expressions shifting from curiosity to wariness. One leaned back against the wall, crossing his arms. "You're the janitor, right?" A cold gasp swept through Frank's chest, but he pressed on. "Yes, I am. But I just contributed to a discussion and I don't want to hear from someone who cleans our classrooms," interjected the same student, laughter dancing around him. The others chuckled, their laughter like shards piercing Frank's resolve. He could feel the warmth of humiliation creeping up his neck. But unlike before, this time the pain birthed determination instead of retreat. He was more than just the janitor. He knew he could be an intellectual contributor too. Enough was enough. "Look, I may clean your classrooms, but I also clean equations. I might surprise you with what I know." The group fell silent, a collective pause hanging in the air charged. He could see uncertainty flickering in their eyes. The potential for actual engagement glimmered at the edge of his fear. "If we're calculating something together, maybe some of you could benefit from a different perspective?" The student, whose name was becoming less important with every passing word, scoffed, "What could you teach us? Stick to your mop." But Frank relied on his growing resolve. "What if I can actually help? Didn't you all just hear what I said about that anomaly?" As he spoke, he could sense the initial judgment beginning to shift, if only slightly. Curiosity welled beneath the surface of their skepticism. It struck him. Christopher, one of the students, broke the spell. Why don't we hear him out? At least he's got the guts to speak up. The relief mixed with disbelief opened a pathway through the tension. Okay, Frank said, feeling momentum build. Let us examine the anomaly together. Together they settled on a bench, their textbooks sprawled between them like a battlefield. Frank's earlier fears faded slightly as they discussed theories. Equations danced through the conversation. Each student took turns framing problems within the context of what they'd learned. And as they did, Frank seized every opportunity to layer his insights, his knowledge and real-world experience upon the theoretical foundation they built. Each moment of back-and-forth banter chipped away at the wall of suspicion. By the end of their exchange, something extraordinary unfolded. They began to acknowledge him as a fellow thinker, a peer who belonged amid them. The burning need to prove himself dulled into a steady pulse of connection and respect. As the group dispersed, Frank felt a small victory. But beneath that upbeat atmosphere swirled shadows, like the remnants of doubt creeping back. What he had achieved now was merely a small refuge from the judgment looming just below the surface. As he walked back, he couldn't shake the nagging sense that the toughest tests were yet to come. The flicker of contempt he initially encountered hadn't disappeared. It loomed larger, promising the challenge of proving himself again and again. He wanted to rise, and yet the question remained. Did he possess the skills necessary to not only face adversity but to conquer it? Perhaps it was time to confront the student who had first cast the shadow. That encounter might just serve as the defining moment he desperately needed to embrace his true potential. The upcoming day promised to be a reckoning, where the confrontation would hold the power to either dissolve the judgment or cement it further into his reality. Would he harness the courage to confront it head-on? The dawn light filtered through the window with a muted glow, illuminating Frank's workspace. The familiar scent of disinfectant mingled with fresh paper as he prepared for another day. Yet, the usual routine idealized in his mind had shifted dramatically over the past few days. Yesterday's engagement with the students had planted a seed of ambition, and what had started as an impulsive act of defiance now festered with the exhilarating promise of possibility. As he set about his cleaning tasks, thoughts raced through his head. What did he need to say to the student who had ridiculed him? How could he convey that being a janitor didn't define his potential, but rather enhanced his perspective? Mid-morning, after finishing his rounds, he sought a quiet corner within the chaotic student union to collect his thoughts. He needed a strategy, a framework to reassert himself. Frank took out a notebook, one of many he collected over the years, filled with notes on mathematics, theories he poured into it whenever he felt inspired. He flipped through the pages until he found a section on the very anomaly he had discussed yesterday. With every equation he traced with his finger, confidence grew, and so did clarity. The student, he could almost hear the laughter now. Tyler. He had to confront Tyler. As intimidating as that prospect loomed, Frank felt an irresistible urge to challenge not only Tyler but his own fears as well. Summoning courage, Frank headed to the corner of the campus where students often gathered. The thrumming heartbeat of the university pulse quickened his resolve. Spotted easily, Tyler was leaning against the wall, scrolling through his phone amid a group of friends. "Hey Tyler," Frank's voice echoed louder than he intended, catching the attention of the group. It was no longer just about defending himself. He realized he was also ready to redefine who he was. "So the mop man returns," Tyler smirked, tossing a glance at his friends, who chuckled in response, but Frank sensed a shift this time. The laughter tasted stale. "Actually," Frank began, putting his hands on his hips, "I'm not just the janitor. I'm capable of offering insight into statistical anomalies, if you care to listen." For a brief moment, silence overtook Tyler's companions. Some exchanged glances, unsure whether to share his amusement or curiosity. In that fleeting instant, Frank saw an opening, a chance to redefine the narrative. "What can you possibly know about statistics?" Tyler scoffed, attempting to regain his control of the situation. But when he looked around, the veiled interest in their eyes dampened his bravado. "I know things you don't," Frank asserted, his voice steadier now, tinged with challenge. "I've been studying this specific anomaly on how data trends align with behavioral outcomes in real-world scenarios. I can demonstrate how it impacts your theories." "What do you mean?" Tyler's skepticism morphed into curiosity, the glint of challenge igniting something within Frank. I have data and examples. If you want to hear them, meet me at the lab after class. Bring your friends. Let us discuss it over numbers instead of jokes. A ripple of intrigue spread through Tyler's crew, and Frank could almost taste the palpable change in the air. Would they see him as someone who belonged, or would they reassert him as an outsider? Tyler hesitated, scanning the faces around him. Finally, with a forced chuckle, he replied, "All right, mop boy. Let us see what you've got." As Frank walked away, exhilaration and dread washed over him in equal measure. He was on the precipice of a moment that could finally bridge the gap between who he had been and who he wanted to become. Showing up at the lab with the burden of future expectations weighed heavily on his shoulders. But now, for the first time in ages, Frank felt the intoxicating rush of possibility. But was he really ready to face Tyler's judgment again? Doubts flickered. What if he couldn't communicate his findings clearly? What if they laughed him out of the room? Tomorrow could burn as brightly as today had awakened a sharp revelation or an unyielding reaffirmation of his place. Would the scale tip toward acceptance or humiliation? Frank's heart raced, his path ahead more uncertain than ever. It was time to not just hold forth numbers but to stake his claim on who he truly was meant to be. The reckoning loomed closer, and with it the chance to redefine everything. Would his courage be enough to break through the weight of perception? The sun hung low in the sky the next day, casting long shadows as Frank made his way to the laboratory. Each step felt heavier than the last. He clutched his notebook tightly, the pages crammed with thoughts and calculations that could either empower him or expose him to ridicule. Upon entering the lab, a wave of sterile air washed over him, smelling faintly of chemical solutions. It was a stark contrast to the chaos of the student union. Frank spotted Tyler already there, flanked by his friends, their faces a mixture of skepticism and intrigue. The casual banter and laughter that usually characterized their gatherings was subdued, almost tense. "Nice of you to finally join us, mop boy," Tyler announced with a sardonic grin, an attempt to reestablish his dominance. But this time the weight of the words felt lighter, almost desperate. Frank steadied his breathing. He was prepared for this. "Thanks for coming," Frank responded, surprising even himself with the firmness in his voice. "I've put together some insights on the anomaly we discussed yesterday." He set the notebook on the table, opening it to a detailed diagram that mapped correlations between behavior patterns and statistical trends. The room fell silent as curiosity flickered across Tyler's face, the bravado fading. Frank could feel the eyes of Tyler's friends on him, weighing his worth in that very moment. He gestured towards his notes, revealing charts illustrating key points, anomalies, potential predictive models, and demonstrated outcomes from existing data. "Here," he said, pointing to a particularly convoluted graph, "is where most people get lost. It's not just a matter of numbers. It's about understanding how those numbers translate into human behavior." As he spoke, the initial doubts began to ebb. Frank found a rhythm. His enthusiasm for the topic sparked a connection. He was no longer just a janitor. He was a keyholder to knowledge. Tyler leaned in closer, brows furrowing as he processed the information. "Wait a minute," Tyler interrupted. "Are you saying that this anomaly can actually predict human choices?" Frank nodded, realizing the thrill coursing through him had shifted from dread to empowerment. He wasn't just speaking about statistics. He was bridging gaps between disciplines, merging his world with the students' expectations. "Exactly. If you can quantify human behavior, you can influence outcomes," he explained, his confidence growing as he drew connections between his life and the data he presented. For the first time, Frank saw Tyler's demeanor shift from derision to genuine interest. Even his friends exchanged nods, engaging in an earnest discussion that fractured the established hierarchy. Frank felt exhilaration drip through him as he navigated through the micro-experiments he had conducted in his mind, sharing insights on practical applications. But in a flicker, doubt returned. Could he hold their attention for long? What would happen if they shifted their laughter back to derision? "What's your source on this?" Tyler asked, leaning back, but the skepticism in his tone had vanished. "Mostly my experience and the studies I've been following for a while. It's all in the data." Frank was admitting his own vulnerability, unraveling layers of pretense he had surrounded himself with. With each word, He stripped away a preconceived notion he held about himself too tightly. As the conversation progressed, Tyler started to argue, raising his own counterexamples backed by textbook theories. But Frank countered with real-world implications that made Tyler's arguments feel hollow. The challenge exhilarated him. Frank found himself rising to it with an unexpected fervor. By the end of their debate, the atmosphere had distinctly changed. Tyler's friends began to offer their insights, and the conversation burgeoned into something collaborative, a dialogue rather than a monologue. Each laugh and nod from his peers fortified Frank's sense of belonging. Yet, a part of him trembled with apprehension. What if he had only skimmed the surface? Would this challenge lead to deeper engagement, or were they merely placating him before retreating back to their previous perceptions? As the session wound down, Tyler shot him a glance, a mix of respect and surprised admiration. "I'll admit it, you're actually pretty insightful." But Frank could feel the pressure of the moment. He had only just begun to carve out a space for himself. He remembered the laughter of yesterday, and wondered if this newfound connection was truly lasting, or merely superficial. For now, the conversation had shifted from contempt to respect, but an unsettling thought lingered. Had he reached his peak, or was it just the beginning? Frank left the lab, heart-pounding, thinking about the next step. Would he muster the courage to keep pushing forward or slip back into the anonymity of his old role? The door to opportunity had opened, but the echo of uncertainty still loomed large. He couldn't shake the feeling that Tyler wasn't done with him yet. The real journey was just about to begin. How far would he go to prove he belonged, and would he be willing to face the darker elements of his ambition? Frank strode toward the lab the following morning, an unsettling mixture of excitement and anxiety roiling within him. The previous day's revelations hovered in his mind like a fragmented dream, a strange blend of affirmation and fear. He had tasted success, but lingering doubts clawed at the edges of his confidence. What if this was merely a fleeting moment of clarity, a blip on the radar of his ordinary life? He entered the lab, greeted by the familiar scent of chemicals intermingled with freshly opened textbooks strewn across the tables. Tyler was already present, engrossed in conversation with his group. Frank caught snippets of laughter, yet this time the banter felt more supportive than mocking. It was as though a shared curiosity had replaced the animosity that once defined their interactions. "Here comes the brainiac," Tyler called, his tone a cautious blend of banter and acknowledgement. The shift was subtle but palpable, a flicker of respect in their rivalry. Frank clenched his notebook tightly, deciding this was his moment to solidify his role. "Ready to dive deeper?" Frank replied, surprising himself with the steadiness of his voice. The banter felt real, as if he instead held the cards this game time, not Tyler. "Let us see what you've got," Tyler responded, leaning against the table, arms crossed with a defiant yet intrigued expression. Others turned their attention to Frank, their curious gazes prompting him to speak. With a deep breath, Frank flipped open his notebook and revealed new data, this time including statistical analyses he had generated overnight. "This is what I compiled. More than predictions, I've devised a model that could actually demonstrate the potential outcomes of behavioral intervention." As charts and graphs adorned the table, Frank spoke not just from his notes but from his heart. He explained how small adjustments to certain variables could lead to different behavioral outcomes, referencing concepts he had soaked in during his late night studying neural pathways, motivation theories, and case studies that intertwined human intuition with statistical validation. Gradually, Frank's trepidation morphed into unfiltered enthusiasm as he engaged his audience. Tyler, initially skeptical, began to offer his perspective, yet this time he did so with something akin to respect. They became intellectual sparring partners, pushing and pulling against each other's ideas, a dance that both challenged and invigorated Frank. But beneath the validation lay a raw heart of fear. What if this was the limit of his understanding? With each assertion, Frank felt himself teeter on the edge of his competence. He needed to solidify this newfound confidence and delve deeper into the scholarship. The thought of returning to obscurity clawed at him like an old habit. "Okay, but how do we apply this?" asked one of Tyler's friends, a sincere question that momentarily stilled the charging atmosphere. Frank paused, recognizing a chance to capitalize on this engagement. "That's the crux of it. If we can frame behavioral predictions accurately, We can influence changes in a community or environment. He wasn't just pitching statistics. He was selling the vision of a world responsive to informed actions. With each answered question in collaborative exchange, Frank felt barriers fade. Yet, as Tyler posed an even tougher counterpoint, the pressure mounted. Did Frank truly understand the theories he promoted? Would he shrink under scrutiny or rise to meet it? I want to run another experiment, but I need support, Frank declared, seizing the moment. What if we combined our ideas? We could attempt a real-world application in the next week. A silence, heavy with contemplation, enveloped the room. Count me in, Tyler replied after a beat, his tone serious. But you'll need to prove it actually works. Frank's heart raced, both thrilled and terrified. This was no longer merely academic. He stood on the precipice of turning theory into practice. But what if he failed? The thought echoed within him. As the group rallied around the project, Frank realized this was both a challenge and an opportunity, one that could reaffirm his place among them or expose the fragility of his understanding. Would he take the plunge into the realm of practical application, or retreat under the weight of immense expectations? With their support, he had sparked a flame of shared ambition. Yet uncertainty loomed large over his next steps. The project could either forge his identity or fracture it. Would he hold fast to his newfound confidence, or would the fear of judgment dim this light before it truly burned bright? Frank stepped outside the lab, breathing in the cool air. The world felt sharper, more urgent, a call for action. The time had come to embrace the shift, but as he moved forward, he couldn't shake the sensation that he was teetering on a dangerous edge. The moment had arrived to test his mettle. What if he discovered challenges within himself he hadn't yet faced? The following week unfolded in a blur of activity, and Frank found himself entrenched in a whirlwind of preparation for their experiment. Mornings blurred with late nights, and the lab buzzed with ideas, yet beneath the surface of collaboration, uncertainty gnawed at him. With each brainstorming session, Frank's confidence felt as fragile as spun glass. He needed to prove himself not just to Tyler and the others but to himself. Each time he returned to his notes, the data felt more complex, difficult to interpret clearly. Was he truly understanding the implications of his model? As ideas poured from his teammates, he instinctively compared their analytical prowess to his muddled thoughts. They seemed to pull from an endless pool of knowledge while he fumbled, feeling increasingly inadequate. Just days before their intended implementation, the pressure transformed into a palpable weight on his shoulders. Frank couldn't dismiss the doubt any longer. Was this the moment he'd finally stepped out of obscurity? Or was it the moment he was destined to fall back into it, trapped in mediocrity? He decided to approach his mentor, Dr. Ellen Garvey, a respected figure in their department whose insights had fueled much of his learning. Frank felt a surge of anxiety as he prepared for their meeting, rehearsing his words in his mind over and over. Would she see through his facade? What if fear overshadowed the potential he had displayed? Sitting across from Dr. Garvey, Frank spilled out his heart, explaining both the excitement and terror that coexisted within him. As she listened, her expression was soft yet steady, a reassuring presence amidst his tempest. You need to embrace the uncertainty, Frank, she said, her voice steady and calm. This experiment is not just about proving yourself. It's about discovering what you're capable of outside of your comfort zones. You've already shown tremendous growth. Acknowledge that. Her words struck him like lightning. He realized he had focused too much on the fear of judgment, rather than the opportunity for discovery. As the conversation progressed, a realization began to clarify in his mind. The true test wasn't the accuracy of predictions or the approval of his peers, but rather his ability to navigate through the unease swirling within him. He left the meeting feeling lighter, yet the weight of the experiment loomed large. The day before implementation, they gathered for a final preparations meeting. Vibrant discussions erupted, but inside him churned a storm. This was his chance to lead. Yet he faltered as Tyler brought forth deeper critiques of their approach. We need to refine our predictions further. It's one thing to propose hypotheses, but are we ready to support them with our actions? Tyler's challenge felt like a dagger to Frank's heart. Did he have the clarity to instill confidence in his peers? Perhaps we should start small and build our way up, suggested another teammate, Tanya. Her calm demeanor struck a stark contrast to Frank's rising anxiety. Focus on one specific area of intervention first. Frank's mind raced, contemplating the suggestions. They needed a strategy that was bold yet practical. All right, let us initiate with a targeted group, he suggested, a newfound steadiness in his tone surprising even himself. We can observe immediate reactions, refine our model in real time, and adapt. His teammates nodded, a mixture of acceptance and renewed enthusiasm making the tension dissipate slightly. Although he wasn't entirely sure he would lead them successfully, the collaborative spirit revitalized his resolve. This could be the first step toward demonstrating his model's viability. As they wrapped up, Tyler clapped Frank on the back, an unexpected gesture that felt like an acknowledgement of his contribution. They were stepping, however tentatively, into a new phase of their relationship. Was it a newfound camaraderie or mere necessity? That night sleep eluded Frank. Questions flitted through his mind like moths drawn to a flame. Would his model withstand the pressure? If the data showcased flaws in his logic, how would he respond? There, among the shadows of doubt, flickered the potential for growth. He could either embrace this as a defining moment or retreat back into the shadows of his insecurities. As dawn broke, illuminating the dark corners of his thoughts, he steeled himself. This is when theories became real, not just through study but through application. The anticipation was bitter and sweet, but it felt like stepping onto a stage where he could finally take control. But what awaited them in the hours to come, as they plunged into the realms of applied theory and tangible outcomes, felt as daunting as it was exhilarating. Frank sensed that he was about to confront not just his fears but the limitations of his very understanding. Would he rise to meet the challenge or succumb to the specter of doubt? The morning air felt electric as Frank stood outside the lab, his heart hammering against his ribcage like a captive bird desperate to fly. The team was gathering, ready to execute the plan they had painstakingly honed over the previous weeks. However, the excitement was overshadowed by the gravity of the task ahead. This was more than an experience, it was a confrontation with his deepest fears. As they filed into the lab, Frank took a moment to appreciate the scene. Equipment neatly arranged, data screens glowing softly, and his teammates chatting in hushed but fervent tones. He positioned himself behind the central workstation, but the confidence he felt last night began to slip through his fingers like sand. He was thrust into the role of leader, and yet the weight of that title felt heavier than ever. Once everyone settled, Frank projected the data onto the primary screen. He had rehearsed this presentation many times, but now it felt as if every word hung in the air, precariously balanced. Today we will implement our experiment, he announced, an attempt at steadiness coating his voice. We'll begin with a targeted group and observe real-time reactions. Remember, data will guide us. Adjust as necessary. Each nod from his teammates felt like both an affirmation and an expectation. Frank's gut twisted as Tyler shot him a look that conveyed a blend of skepticism and encouragement. It felt less like camaraderie and more like scrutiny, a reminder that his colleagues were as eager for success as they were ready to pierce through failure. Frank swallowed hard, his gaze darting from the screen to Tyler's face, his vision clouded by uncertainty. As the experiment commenced, numbers and feedback began to populate the arrays, a flurry of graphical data swirling before him. Orange lines danced up and down, reflecting the reactions they sought to study. But as moments turned to hours, the feedback proved uncertain. Some areas yielded promising results, while others floundered inexplicably, casting shadows over his model's validity. His mind raced. Had he miscalculated? What if the flaws in his design were glaring? Questions thrashed inside him like a tempest, and doubt nudged closer. Yet within this maelstrom, a flicker of resolve ignited. The essence of Dr. Garvey's advice rang in his ears. Embrace the uncertainty. Adjust the parameters, he muttered, shifting his focus to immediate responses. The fear edging his thoughts morphed into fierce determination. We need to adapt fast. Let us analyze the low-performing segments in real time. He became aware that his teammates were watching him closely, their faith resting on his shoulders. Each moment of hesitation would only serve to deepen their skepticism. As information continuously filed in, Frank felt a new rhythm emerge. The challenge no longer felt like a burden. It became an opportunity to rethink and refine his understanding. They redirected their efforts, causing a palpable shift in the atmosphere. Ideas began flowing again, discussions igniting like sparks in a darkened room. It wasn't the perfect execution he had envisioned, but it was dynamic, adaptable, alive. Just as the data began to stabilize, Tyler turned to him with a grin. "You're onto something here, Frank. Let's take a deeper dive." Frank felt the warmth of acceptance transforming the air around him. Perhaps this was a growing camaraderie, not just necessity. Then came the moment of reckoning. The data line began to dip dangerously low again, and a cold sweat pricked at the back of Frank's neck. He could feel the scrutiny intensifying, and his stomach sank. What if we fail this time? The doubt whispered, creeping back into his psyche. He faced the screen, willing for the numbers to improve, each increasing tick feeling like a plea. The moment felt devoid of time as he battled his own spiraling apprehension. Just then, a radical thought pierced through the chaos. Data reflects behavior. Perhaps a change in our approach could shift the outcomes entirely. Let us reconsider the baseline assumptions, he proposed, his voice surprisingly firm. We need to think outside the box. His team reacted, sparks of inspiration igniting their minds as they bounced ideas off one another. As they adapted their approach, Frank experienced a shift from being a mere participant to an architect of solutions. What began as a potential humiliation transformed into a collective endeavor, a journey toward mastery and understanding. But what if this newfound resolve was not the end? Could the experimentation lead to revelations that shook the very foundation of their initial hypotheses? Frank understood that tomorrow would not only test their model, but also lay bare the limits of their collective imagination. The moment of truth loomed larger than ever, as Frank braced for the implications of the path they had chosen. The following day dawned, presenting Frank with an invigorating mix of anticipation and apprehension as he prepared for the culmination of their experiment. The laboratory buzzed with an electric energy, and Frank noted the camaraderie growing among the group, an undeniable shift that had transformed their collaborative spirit from mere necessity to shared ambition. Tyler arrived early, a familiar spark lighting his eyes, and greeted Frank with a nod. "Ready to show everyone what we can do?" he asked, a subtle hint of respect underlying the question. "Let us do this," Frank replied resolutely, feeling a wave of determination surge within him. Anticipation replaced self-doubt, and as the clock counted down, Frank focused on the final data presentations he had meticulously curated. When everyone assembled, Frank stood before the screen, the gathered data shimmering across its surface, a testament to the fusion of his theoretical groundwork and the practical adjustments the group had implemented over the past few days. "Today we will assess our findings and evaluate the efficacy of our behavioral interventions," he announced, a thread of pride weaving through his voice. Each slide transitioned, revealing the power of adaptation. The lines that once dipped precariously were now on an upward trajectory. By modifying our original parameters based on real-time feedback, we achieved a marked improvement in outcomes, he articulated, passion fueling his expression. Lively discussion erupted among his teammates. Ideas flew back and forth, merging mathematics with real-world implications in ways that illuminated true understanding. For the first time, Frank felt like the orchestrator of dialogue, an active participant influencing his peers. He wove their thoughts with insights from his own experiences, creating a tapestry rich in meaning and applicability. "Great work, everyone," he said, hearteningly as they moved toward concluding presentations. He felt confident, validated not just as a janitor, but as a mathematician, an innovator, an equal member of a community that once felt so distant. But every joy almost eclipsed the nagging echoes of fear. Could this acceptance last? What if today's success led to unforeseen challenges tomorrow? Such moments of uncertainty lingered, but Frank resolved to embrace them, to confront the shadows head-on instead of cowering in their presence. After the presentation, Tyler approached him, an unmistakable glint of admiration in his eyes. "You've changed the conversation today, Frank." "Seriously, I didn't expect that," he said, effectively dismantling the barriers they had previously stood behind. "Thanks, Tyler." "It means a lot," Frank replied, exhaling a breath he had been holding. Within that exchange lay a moment of euphoric clarity, the unfiltered recognition of his capabilities. With their project gaining traction, Frank's newfound confidence began to unfold beyond the confines of the lab. He sought mentorship from Dr. Garvey more frequently, engaging in deep discussions that broadened his perspective and illuminated new pathways of thought. he hadn't considered before. Over time, he embarked on additional collaborations within the department, expanding his network and establishing himself as a valued contributor. His recognition morphed into respect among peers and faculty alike. The professor who once dismissed him for being merely the janitor now saw him as an emerging scholar with innovative insights to offer. He paved new avenues for himself, elevating his role within the university by eventually teaching a workshop on statistical analysis for undergraduates, an once unfathomable leap from cleaning their classrooms to guiding their learning. As weeks turned into months, Frank reveled in the acknowledgement of his hard work. The shadows that once clung to him faded, replaced by solid confidence and an established position in the community. Success was not just in accolades but in belonging. He had redefined his identity. In that splendid newfound light, he realized that true achievement lay not merely in recognition from others but in the silent affirmations of self-worth he had cultivated within. Diagnosing fear and replacing it with courage had transformed him from the invisible janitor into a recognized thinker. His journey, a testament to the remarkable universe of possibilities that waited for those brave enough to seize them. Frank Hudson no longer shuffled through the campus. He walked with purpose, each step resolute, each interaction imbued with the satisfaction of earned recognition. He had conquered not just the algorithm but the labyrinth of his insecurities. This was the essence of his journey, embracing the complexity of self-doubt and recalibrating his narrative to meaningful pursuits. He had fundamentally reinvented not only how he saw himself but how the world perceived him. Now he waited for the next challenge, confident he would rise to meet it. You need to subscribe now to follow the next transformative tales that will inspire your own journey. Leave a like now to help us reach more people. Your engagement fuels this community. Comment your thoughts on Frank's journey. What did you find most inspiring? Don't wait even one more second to share this story with at least 5 friends who need that encouragement today.